Section 10 of The Lost Oases by Ahmad Muhammad Hassanayn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11, On the Trek. On Thursday, March 15th, we were ready to trek. I got up at 6 to pack and get my baggage ready. As is usual on the first day of a journey, when the caravan is not yet shaken down and accustomed to the routine, it took us 3 hours to load. We were to follow the Bedouin custom of tag-hees, which means going to a nearby well before beginning a journey, and spending several days, sometimes a week, in final preparations away from the distractions of town life. Boutefal Well, 30 kilometers from Jallo, was the point where we were to make our tag-hees, or preparation. When the packing was well underway, the Kaimakam, Notables, and Ikhwan came to give us the ceremonial mo'ada, or farewell. We squatted together and discussed the prospects for the journey. I had made the same trip to Kufra 2 years before under somewhat more favorable conditions, and nevertheless we had lost our way before getting to Kufra. It had been cooler then, 2 months earlier in the year. The winds and sandstorms had not been so incessant, and the caravan had been smaller. The problem of providing camels, their fodder, men, and food, and equipment for the men did not arise then, as the whole caravan was produced complete and provided for by the generosity of Sayyid Idris, a fact which had a considerable effect in lulling suspicions of the Bedouins and subduing their hostility to strangers. On this occasion I had to arrange for the camels and personnel, and so big a caravan, journeying with a quantity of unusual luggage necessary for a long journey, naturally aroused curiosity. On these long, waterless treks, nature is often the only enemy, and she can be one if she chooses. The men of my caravan worked well together. The 4 whom I had brought from Cairo, Salim and Siwa, got on excellently with all the people we met. Sir Wali, the Sanusi Ikhwan delegated by Sayyid Idris to accompany us, was kindness itself, and did everything in his power to make the journey as comfortable as possible. I felt no real concern over the outcome, no matter what nature might choose to do. When the camels were all loaded, we went through the dignified ceremony of the farewell. We took our stand in 2 half circles facing each other, the men of my caravan and myself in one, and the chiefs of Jallo and the Ikhwan in the other. Solemnly and reverently we raised our hands, palms upward, for prayers that the journey should be a blessed one, that God would guide us and return us safe to our homes. We read the Fatiha, the first chapter of the Koran, the oldest of the Ikhwan saying the Amen. Then we shook hands and parted. The shouts of the men urging on the camels were echoed by lulias from the women of the village, and we were on our way. As we passed El Leba, the second village of Jallo, a pleasant incident occurred to send us cheerfully on our way. The solitary, graceful figure of a girl appeared beside our path, her face hidden from us by the Bedouin veil. With one voice, the men nearest her called out the traditional greeting, "Wajik, Wajik, your face, your face." The girl turned and demurely drew aside her veil to disclose the finely chiseled features, the clear olive skin, and the shy yet dignified expression of a Bedouin maiden. The men shouted with delight at her beauty and her courtesy. To complete the tradition, I ordered them to empty gunpowder at her feet. Ahmad and Saad performed the graceful ceremony, first one and then the other. The man danced lightly toward her as if to the imaginary rhythm of a Bedouin drum, his rifle held in both hands over his head, the muzzle pointing forward, shouting a desert love song as he went. Just in front of her he dropped lightly on one knee, brought his gun to the vertical position, butt upward, and fired, a hair's breadth from her feet. So close was the shot, and so accurate his aim, that the girl's slippers were singed by the powder flash. She did not flinch at the explosion, but stood gracefully erect in her pride at the honor done her. Singed slippers are a mark of distinction in the desert that any Bedouin girl cherishes. When Saad had followed Hamad's example, Another shout rose from the men of the caravan, and we moved on. The girl smiled after us, as flattered by the homage that had been paid her as we were by the good omen of a pretty face crossing our path at the outset of our journey. Within an hour we were in the open desert again. 8 hours' trekking brought us to Boutefal Well, where we were to stop a day. We took matters easily that first night, with singing and conversation about the campfire till after midnight. When the camp had settled down for the night, I took my pipe and went for a stroll. This was always one of the pleasures of my life in the desert, that last pipe of peace before turning in, and of peace it always was. If the day had been good, there was contentment. If bad, there was hope for the next day, and faith that all would be well. During the whole journey, I never went to sleep with anything really worrying me, worrying, that is, my mind itself, no matter how I might have been tried by the occurrences or by conditions. The next day was spent in final preparations. Bu Halega, the owner of the camels, arrived with his own little caravan of 3 camels. During the day another man had come from Jallo to catch up with us. We had been in need of rope and twine, but the price asked by the dealers had been too high. So Abdullahi chatted with them and left the actual closing of the bargain to the last minute. Then he had arranged with a man named Sunusi Bujabir to bring the rope after us to Boutefal. When this man arrived, he came to my tent to tell me that his brother was in Wadai and to ask me to take him with us. He would work to pay for his passage. I looked him over and quickly decided that he would do. I discovered particularly that he had a sense of humor, almost, if not quite, the most valuable asset in desert travel. Ability may fail, but a keen sense of humor enables one to get the last ounce out of a man in possession of it. I was ready to take him, but it did not seem possible. "We are leaving at once," I said. "There is no time for you to make the day's journey to Jallo and back for your luggage." "I have it," he said. "Where is it?" I demanded, looking about in bewilderment. "Here," he answered, pointing to the shirt he wore and the stick he carried. I burst into a hearty laugh at the idea of such an outfit for a hard desert trek, and he joined me cheerfully. I assured him that he might go, and never regretted my decision. He proved to be one of the best men I had. The next morning we watered the camels, a process which must not be hurried. Nothing is more important in trekking than the condition of your camels. Not only must they be fat and well nourished at the start, but they must be allowed to drink their fill with deliberation and permitted to rest after drinking. When the camels were ready, they were loaded with the greatest care, for good packing and loading at the beginning mean time and trouble saved all through the journey. The rapidity with which the loading and unloading can be accomplished day after day sometimes means a gain of a day or two in time before the trip is over. At 2:30 we were ready to start. As the camels moved slowly off, the sonorous voice of Bu Halega rose in the azan, the calling to prayers, according to Bedouin custom at the beginning of a long trek. It is the Bedouin tradition that those who begin the journey with the azan will end it with the azan. They will, that is, meet with no disaster by the way. Our caravan had gradually become enlarged until it consisted of 39 camels, 21 men, a horse, and a dog. Our personnel was as follows: myself and my 4 men, Abdullahi, Ahmed, Hamad, and Ismail; Zerwali, Bu Halega, the owner of the camels, with his son, his nephew, and his slave. There was also Dawood, Zerwali's uncle, who was going with a single camel to Tizerbo to bring back his wife and daughter; Sunusi Bu Hassan, our guide; Sunusi Bojabir, the boy with the shirt and staff; Hamad Zaweya, another boy who was a pleasant singer; Saad the Aujuli, Faraj the slave, 2 Tibus with their 3 camels. In addition, there were 3 other Tibus with 3 camels loaded with merchandise which they were taking to deliver to merchants in Kufra. We set our faces southward and journeyed toward Kufra. It was hot and windy, and the desert lay about us like an interminable pancake. The ground was seria, which is flat, hard sand, with a little gravel scattered over it. Our first objective was the Zigan well, which we ought to make in 8 or 9 days. In the old days, before the time of the Senussis, it had been the custom to make the trek from Jalo to Zigan in 3 days and 5 nights, marching continuously without a stop for food or rest. But the Senussis changed all that. They inaugurated the custom of taking enough water and food to permit the journey to be made in twice the time, with adequate rest for camels and men each day. At first our camels moved reluctantly, for they had just left good grazing and would much rather have gone back to it. Buhalega tried his best to persuade the trading Tibus to lead the caravan with their camels, but they cleverly refused. The place of honor at the head of the line is an arduous one. Camels are quite ready to follow others ahead of them, but dislike to go forward independently. So the first camel in the caravan has to be driven and often beaten with a stick to keep him going. The Tibus preferred to bring up the trail of the procession where their camels needed no urging. But Halega got even with them later, however, because of their choice of position. It was hot and windy all the afternoon, but in the evening the wind dropped to a gentle breeze, and the desert put forth its full charm. I find recorded in my diary some of the thoughts and feelings on getting back into this old familiar desert, where I was approaching the point at which we lost our way 2 years before. The same old flat desert and feelings of old memories. How one forgives the desert her scorching sun and her torturing wind for the calm of the evening, the sunset, and the moon rising, and then that gentle and serene breeze. How easily one forgets the presence of her dangers. It is the full appreciation of simple pleasures that endears the desert to one, in spite of all her harshnesses and crudities. A glass of tea, a cigarette, a pipe when the caravan is asleep and the fragrance of the tobacco is wafted by the gently stirring air. A glimpse of the playing of the firelight on the faces of the men of the caravan, some old and rugged, some smooth and youthful. To see men toil, succeed and fail and suffer in another sphere of life. Above all, to be near to God and to feel His presence. On the 18th, we got up at 6, and the camels were briskly loaded in 35 minutes. The careful first loading at Jalo and Butterfall made speed possible now. Nevertheless, it was 9 o'clock before we were ready for the start. The morning program in camp is not one that can be safely hurried. The Bedouin dislikes intensely to be rushed over his meals or to be deprived of those moments of leisure thereafter, which are so essential to peaceful digestion and a contented spirit. The wise leader will see that these prejudices of his men are carefully observed. Perhaps this is a good place to set down the outline of a typical day's trek under the conditions which prevailed until we reached Arkanu. Although it is March, it is still cold in the morning, and one gets up a little after dawn because it is too cold to stay in bed longer. Even the sleeping bag and the Bedouin blanket will not keep out the chill. A peep through the flaps of the tent shows that the stars are paling in the sky. Someone has the fire already started, and the first impulse is to get to it without delay. Throwing my dirt about me and wrapping the kufiya around my ears, I dash out to the crackling blaze. There is nothing hot about the desert in these crisp morning hours. I stand by the fire and have a look around. There is little life in the camp yet, though all the men are up. They are huddled close to the warmth, muffled in jerds and every other garment that they can lay their hands on. When water is plenty, steaming hot glasses of tea are handed around, and after they are drunk, the activities of the camp divide. The camelmen go to feed the camels with dried dates, which the beasts munch reflectively, stones and all. A consultation is sometimes held over the camels, if some of them have suffered the previous day from too heavy loads. Perhaps a shifting of loads is decided on, or better packing and loading recommended. Other men are pulling down the 3 tents, which form the apexes of a triangle with the camels parked at its center. The luggage which had been set up as a barricade against the icy wind is sorted out and arranged ready for the loading. Meanwhile, I have been attending to the barometer and the thermometer, registering their readings, filling in the spaces in my scientific diary, seeing that the cameras have fresh films. The voices of the men sound low through the camp, muffled by kufias and extra clothing. At last, breakfast is ready. It may be asida, the Bedouin national dish, a kind of pudding baked of flour, oil, and spices, or it may be rice. It is an utterly simple meal in either case, but with what keen appetite one attacks it. In the desert, any disinclination for the first meal of the day that one may feel in city surroundings vanishes away. Breakfast is finished off with the inevitable 3 glasses of tea, taken slowly and reflectively. Whatever one does, one must not deprive one's men of their tea or hurry them over it. Give a Bedouin a filling meal and let him sip 3 glasses of tea after it, and you can get any work out of him that you want. Stint him or rush him, and you will get worse than nothing. After breakfast, everyone is warm and contented and ready to work hard. The loading goes on swiftly, diversified at times by the antics of the 2 or 3 young and frolicsome camels that seem to get into every caravan. These young fellows resist being loaded and even throw off their loads when the job is apparently all finished. Zerwali and Abdullahi are alert to see that the loading is done with the utmost care and precision. An extra half hour spent now may save 2 or 3 hours delay on the road later, caused by the slipping of the loads or improper distribution of the burdens. When the caravan is all but ready, I have a few words with the guide about the direction of our day's march. He draws a line on the sand and says that there lies our way. I take a bearing of the line with my compass, a proceeding which doubtless seems to him an absurd if harmless idiosyncrasy of mine, but I like to be able to check with the compass the direction the caravan is taking as the day goes on. On the whole, the precaution proves unnecessary, however, for Sanusi Bu Hassan goes straight to his mark as a homing pigeon. Only in the middle of the day he sometimes wobbles a bit. In the daytime he travels by a shadow, and, as he explains, when the sun is high and the shadow lies between my feet, then my head goes round. There is one other hour in the day when the guide's task is a perplexing one. In the twilight hour between the setting of the sun and the appearance of the stars, all directions on the desert's vast disk are the same. Then sometimes the compass is useful. Once, by means of the bearing I had taken in the morning, I caught the guide in the hour between sun and stars going almost 90 degrees off the right direction. But, as a rule, the accuracy with which a good guide like Sanusi Bu Hassan steers his course is almost uncanny. Our conference over and the last camels loaded, the guide sets out ahead, and one by one the camels follow. The men of the caravan have a last warm-up of hands and feet at the dying fire, thrust their feet into the Bedouin shoes, and hasten after the camels, singing gaily. The sun is getting warm by now, and unless there is a strong wind blowing from the north, one disposes quickly of wrappings on the ears of the neck, and finally with the jird. The extra garments are flung on the backs of camels, jokes begin to crack, foot races are run, and everybody is happy to be alive. Gradually the men sort themselves into groups of 2 and 3, spaced at intervals along the caravan, chatting about their own affairs or about things in general. Sometimes I walk at the head of the caravan, and again some distance behind it, to keep an eye on the direction it is taking, and especially to enjoy the sense of solitude and remoteness. Toward midday, contemplation of the beauties of nature is sometimes disturbed by other and less romantic thoughts. My mind occasionally wanders toward favorite restaurants in faraway civilization. As I stride along, I imagine myself in Shepard's grill room in Cairo, and I order crevette à l'américaine with that subtle variation of riz à l'orientale which is a specialty of the house. Or I am at Prunet's in Paris, ordering meringue verte d'Ostend, followed by a steak and a soufflé. Perhaps it is the cova at Milan and a succulent dish of risotto à la Milanese, maybe strawberries melba at the Ritz in London, or again a Circassian dish of rice with walnut sauce, which is the masterpiece of the old and beloved slave who really rules my father's house in Cairo, occupying the privileged position of a treasured nanny of long service in an English family. Suddenly, Ahmed or Abdullahi comes along and without a word pushes a bag of squashed dates into my palm. Dreams vanish, and I eat with as much appetite as though there were no better fare in all the world. There is no halt for lunch, as the camels eat only twice a day. If we have just left an oasis, there is fresh bread, half a loaf or even a whole one to each man, with dates. Later on, that fresh bread becomes hard bread, and still later, no bread at all. But there are always dates. I have one camel fitted up with a folded tent over its back, so that any one of us may lie and take his ease when tired of walking. Ahmed calls it the club. One day, at the lunch hour, Abdullahi demands where I am and whether I have had my portion of bread and dates or not, and Ahmed replies with a twinkling eye and an otherwise grave face, "The Bey is lunching at the club today." It is entirely possible, when you are used to it, to have a good nap on the camel's back, and an occasional ride is not to be scorned. But generally one walks, for the camel's pace of 2.5 miles an hour is an easy one to keep up with, and riding is often more tiring than going on foot. Sometimes during a whole day's trek, a narrow strip of water lies shimmering on the horizon ahead of the caravan. It never gets any nearer, but continues to beckon, a cool and pleasant invitation until the sun has rolled around to the west and the mirage vanishes away. It is a purely optical illusion, for there is no water there. Another kind of mirage comes sometimes in the early morning. Then the country far ahead of one appears in the sky at the horizon, as the Bedouins say, upside down. This is not, as the other variety of mirage is, entirely an illusion. It is really the reversed reflection of the country 30 or 40 kilometers ahead of where the observer stands. As the sun rises higher above the horizon, suddenly the mirage vanishes as magically as it came. There are also other tricks of reflection of light in the desert. Sometimes, for instance, a small pebble the size of a cricket ball seen from a mile away might assume the appearance of a big rock, standing like a landmark. The skeleton or part of the skeleton of a camel or a human being may take on the most fantastic shapes on the horizon, but the Bedouins know it well. It is absurd to say that the Bedouin is lured by the mirage out of his way, and even to his destruction. The seasoned desert traveler knows a mirage when he sees one. It is entirely possible, indeed, that the upside-down variety may be a positive assistance, since it can suggest what kind of country lies ahead. The mirage is an interesting phenomenon, but it is not one of the perils of desert travel. In the afternoon there are several hours of heat, the pace of the camels slackens, and the whole caravan becomes quiet and somnolent. As evening comes on and it grows cool again, the camels pick up their speed and go into a final spurt before the time for making camp. The men sing to the camels then to stimulate their efforts, and the beasts respond cheerfully to the encouragement. The songs are simple and poetic, full of the atmosphere of the desert life. One of them represents a Bedouin waiting at an oasis for the expected caravan. He sings to the approaching camels, "Gone is the night, come are the Mazaran to the morning sky. You are here, and vanished o'er all our fears." The singer speaks of his camels. In companies the sand dunes march to meet them, pointing the homeward way. The singer addresses his camels. The sand dunes hide many wells that brim with waters unfailing. You come to their margins like bracelets, wrought of gold and rare gems in far countries. In another, the singer is still addressing his camels. The wells lie hid in the dunes, masked by the sands drifted over them. You approach them in ones and twos, O you who reveal hidden places. The last song that I shall set down shows the traditional attitude of the Bedouin to his camel. It is his most precious possession. To give it up without a struggle to the death is dishonor. A Bedouin might wait to take revenge for the killing of a brother or a son, but if his camel were stolen, He would not rest until he found it and brought it back by force of arms, if necessary. "He who will not risk his life for his camel," says the Bedouin, "does not deserve to have it." So the camel driver sings to his beast, "For your sakes, O ye who cherish us, as loving mothers their children, for your sakes the sons of nobles have lain stark on the sands, unsheltered by tomb or burial." The men suit the song to the occasion. The first one that I have translated might be used when an oasis was not far off, the second when the caravan is approaching sand dune country, the third and fourth when they are nearing a well, and the last when entering a hostile region. At sunset I make it a point to be near the guide and unobtrusively to check him up with my compass in those uncertain hours before the stars come out. When the dark falls, a lantern is lighted and given to the guide. Then we follow that elusive pinpoint of yellow in the darkness. It winks a provocative invitation to follow, but we can never reach it. The camels like to have the lantern ahead of them and move briskly forward in pursuit. 12 or 13 hours of walking, if conditions have been good, bring us to the end of the day's trek, though sometimes we cannot go on for so long. "Eder ya ayan, home for you who are weary," is shouted by the guide and repeated by every man in the caravan. Then the men collect the camels and divide them, the water camels here, those carrying tents over there, the camels with luggage for the barricade yonder. The camels are barracked, kneel with grunts of satisfaction to have their loads removed. Now we must be vigilant, for men tired by a day's trek are likely to be careless and let boxes with precious instruments or cameras fall with disastrous violence. The baggage is arranged in a barricade, if the night promises to be windy, and the tents are pitched in their triangle, unless the night is particularly calm and pleasant. I could never decide which moment was fuller of satisfaction, that in which the tent was set up after a hard day's trek, or that in which it was pulled down, preliminary to taking the road again. Then the fire is built, and the leaping flames of the hatab throw a warm glow over the sand. The first thing is tea. Now I realize to the full the virtues of the dark, bittersweet liquid that the Bedouins know by that name. They make tea by taking a handful of the leaves and a handful of sugar and boiling them briskly in a pint of water. The result would drive a housewife of the West almost insane, but it is a wonderful stimulant after a hard day's trek in the desert, and a glorious reviver of one's energies and spirits. The men of the caravan are not slow to prepare and eat the evening meal, to feed the camels, and then dispose themselves for sleep. But I must compare my 6 watches and wind them, record the photographs made during the day, change the cinema films in the darkness, no mean feat in itself, label and store the geological specimens I have collected, and write up my diaries. The glasses of Bedouin tea which I have drunk help me to accomplish these duties, and then probably stimulate me for a walk in the desert. If there's no bitter cold wind, I go for perhaps a half a mile, looking back from time to time at the silhouette of the caravan against the sky. The dark masses of the tents, the baggage, and the kneeling camels, touched here and there with flickers of light from the dying fire, in the midst of that immense sea of sand, make a picture full of mystery and fascination. All about me is silence. There is no wind whispering in the leaves, no murmur of the waters of a brook such as one hears in the wooded wilds, no slap and plash and swish of waves against the ship's side such as are always present at sea. Nothing but silence. Silence, the sands, and the stars. End of section 10.